Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Korvold, Fey Cursed King, a Treasure and Sacrifice deck. This is one of our donation decks and comes to us from Royal Beast, who says, "Hey there, I'm currently fine-tuning my deck, aiming on land-based ramping and using treasures for finishing the game, particularly with Voltron-ish Korvold. However, I realized I might need some more card draw options beyond just relying on Korvold, and it could also benefit from exploring other finishers. Any other suggestions or insights you would have would be fantastic. Thanks a bunch for your help." And in terms of restriction, they say, "I'd rather avoid tutors, except for lands. Ain't it always the way? Ain't it always the way?" And they say they're not keen on using old border cards. Additionally, avoid cards that deal damage through pinging effects like Reckless Fireweaver. It does make me think of a bit of a question about Mayhem Devil, but I'll be honest, I'm very happy that Mayhem Devil's here, so I'm not gonna ask too much. Thank you so much for sending your deck, Royal Beast, and thank you for supporting the channel. Always very much appreciated. Korvold is like, I don't know, like kind of one of the main boogeymen of the format, I think. I've never seen a Korvold deck, you know, at a table that doesn't like deserve all the hate it gets. And don't get me wrong, I love aristocrat strategies, I love sacrifice, and I love Korvold. So I'm really excited to take a look at this deck. So let's start with the commander and get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who's Korvold, Fey Cursed King, and why are they our commander for our treasure and sack deck? Korvold is 5 mana in Jund, that's black, red, green, legendary dragon noble, 4/4 flying. And there are 2 very good abilities. First one's pretty good. Whenever they attack or enter the battlefield, sacrifice another permanent. A Titan effect that works really well with that second ability. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. And that's just insane. I feel like I don't even need to go much further to talk about that. The ability to turn any sacrifice effect into card draw. The +1/+1 counters are nice, but generally the card draw is just really good. And looking at the deck as a whole, I am a very big fan of it. I think this deck is in a really good position and is pretty set in a lot of ways. There's a few things I want to point out and I kind of want to like direct some attention to, but generally this is a very well built deck. I will say there is this element of whether or not tutors would be the next step in a deck like this. Like we're approaching a ceiling on the deck very quickly, but we definitely can go a little further without feeling that we need to run tutors. I will also note we've reached that kind of power level of all of our cards that I'm going to start kind of nitpicking very specific cards and specific mana costs and kind of the curve and the like. So let's get into it. The first thing I think is worth noting, if people who've opened the deck list haven't seen already, this is 109 cards, so obviously we want to just take 9 lands out. I'm joking, please don't do that. But we can easily take out at least 3 lands and take out a few other cards here and there. I'll name some of the cards that I don't think are as strong, but we are already at a surplus, let's say. Coming down to the curve, you can kind of already see immediately what my big problem of the deck is. And it's very much so we're heavy on 3 mana. And we're not really supporting that with some 1 mana ramp options, which is something that we'll get to. So looking at our 3 mana cards, we'll start here. There's a few that I want to talk about, but I want to notably kind of talk about this section here of Harrow, Realms Uncharted, Roiling Regrowth. These 3 right here. So one of the things that Royal Beast said that this is a land-based ramp deck. And I don't want to just go ahead and remove all of that, even though we can see we have like Springbloom Druid here, and I think we have a few others in other, Entish Restoration is another one. And I recognize that especially these Harrow style effects work with Korvold. They're very good because it turns into sacrifice a land, put 2 lands onto the battlefield, draw a card. And that's a really strong card to play. However, I will note that it is pushing us so heavily into like this 3 mana zone. Like at this point we're playing so many of these effects that I think it's just holding us back at this point, right? I think they're really interesting cards, but the ramp is only going to get you so far, and we're not ramping into these. I think I'd be less kind of critical on them if we had more 1 mana creatures that immediately put us to 3 mana, and then we immediately cast like Harrow right after, and then we have, you know, the ability to make the most of it. But I will also note something that that is another problem with this is Harrow cards, like Harrow and I believe Entish Restoration, they also come in untapped. No, they come in tapped. So Harrow is the strongest one because they come in untapped. However, we're not even fully using that because if we come here, we're only running 11 spells at 2 mana. So even if we Harrow and we have 2 mana out of that spell, we're not like efficiently using it either. So it makes me even less keen on having these cards. I don't know if I'd cut all of them, but I would definitely cut most of them, I think. I think this deck has the situation that a lot of very powerful decks have, where we're just kind of moving all of our power kind of into one direction. And I think like that direction is low mana, right? We can't just be playing all of this ramp while we have opponents at the same power level, because we're just going to be spending our time kind of spinning our wheels and not really getting ahead. And even if we look at the idea that at a certain point that Harrows become cyclers because of Korvold, that's a pretty win more version of that. You'll have to excuse me, I was away yesterday and I think my son is missing a little bit of attention, so I'm just gonna leave him here for a little bit. So with that in mind, I think I would cut these. Looking at a few other 3 mana cards, one that immediately catches my eye is Pitiless Carnage. And I hate, you know, cutting a card that just got printed, so we know it's gonna be definitely played and tested. Pitiless Carnage is definitely win more in terms of mana cost. Not only is the plot at 3, which is the number I don't really like, at 4, this feels really greedy, and I think this is a card that belongs a lot more in decks that threaten to like storm off or something, where you can tap out all your mana, generate a bunch, use Pitiless Carnage, sacrifice all of your lands, and then draw that many cards and go off. Now, it is something to be said that Pitiless Carnage's ability to sacrifice lands is really good, and I do prefer it to another sack permanent creature that we'll look into in a second, but I will say that like it's just unimpressive. I feel like you have to be very far ahead for this to be good, and it's so win more, right? Pitiless Carnage represents like you use this to sacrifice a bunch of extra lands or treasures, and then you draw off of this, and then you draw off of Korvold. And that's really good, but also doesn't need to be that good. That's too good. Like, it's too far in that one scenario. And in the rest of the scenarios, I just don't think you can generate enough tokens that you feel like you're not taking a big loss. Like, if we can make enough food and clue tokens regularly, maybe that would be easier. But at the moment, I do think, like, this card is just going to most of the time be kind of medium. And I think you would just rather something a little more consistent, let's say. Looking at the few others, I feel like maybe this is me. I feel like the Reanimation Excavators and the Crucible of Worlds and the Crucible and Conduit of Worlds is maybe too many. These cards are good, but like maybe not here. Like, don't get me wrong, I get the idea that you use this to play like a fetch land. Let's find one. Please, there has to be fetch lands. There we go. We play Verdant Catacombs, we sacrifice Verdant Catacombs, and later on and we draw a card, then later we play Verdant Catacombs again. You know, it also lets us buy back like Field of the Dead and the like. It lets us buy back the lands we lose to Harrow. But like, is that really going to be worth a full slot at 3 mana in a deck like this? Or not, I mean a full slot, 2 full slots with Crucible as well? I don't think so. I don't think these cards are just good enough. I think they're cute, I think they're kind of crutches, and I think they should be cut. They feel like there are situations that I think they're good enough, But in those situations, I think Conduit of Worlds does a good enough job as a one-of that I think we don't need the other two. Likewise, Realms Uncharted, like these cards are making me feel like this is a bit of like overflow from a land deck. And don't get me wrong, like there is a lot of powerful lands and things you could be doing, but this doesn't like naturally coincide with our main plan as much. Like Realms Uncharted is really, really good when you have things like, oh, what is our Jund Planeswalker, our Panther or Jaguar? I don't know, big cats. Which is funny because I'm just holding my black cat. Lord Windgrace. With Lord Windgrace, Realms Uncharted is really good because those two cards that go to the graveyard immediately go on the battlefield. But even with like the cards I just told you to take out of Conduit or the Ramunnap, sorry, I always get that one wrong. Ramunnap Excavator. I really think it's like a lot of hoops to jump through to just maybe get Field of the Dead onto the battlefield. And Field of the Dead's real good, but I think you would be spending your time and resources on something a little better. I even note that Wasteland is not in the main deck, and if you were to use like Wasteland and start like Wasteland locking your opponents with Conduit or things like that, and maybe that gets a little better, but these cards right now aren't very much so impressing me. Scapeship at least like is a similar vein, but because of the sacrifice clause and the fact that you can immediately set up Field of the Dead for 4 mana, I like that a lot more. Alright, looking at a few other cards that kind of catch my eye. Looking at the creatures, so Malevolent, I believe, it's not Malvolent, this is ESL stuff, but Malevolent Witchkite is just, I think, a little too cute for what it does. I think it's a very strong card, and I do appreciate that this doubles as our commander in a way that's a little more impressive than our Pitiless Carnage. But even then, I still have kind of a hard time with this creature. The fact that it is more specific, like we can't sacrifice our lands, is kind of something I'm not too impressed with. And the fact that, you know, it's really artifacts and tokens, which in this deck is pretty much the same thing. I don't think we're going to draw as much out of this as we want. And the ceiling is, once again, you know, it's predetermined by, it requires your commander to come out. I swear at one point I knew words, but with your commander out and Malevolent Witchkite, you get this ability to draw, what, like 15 cards really easy. Which is impossible, should be even, so let's say 16 cards. But you don't need that. If your commander's out, you're probably drawing a bunch of cards. You don't need this 5/4 flying dragon to do so for 6 mana. And even if you ramp into it, which is something like I do understand the deck can do, ramp into this early, then most likely you've spent your resources and you don't have enough sacrifices to use that ETB well. Likewise, a little higher up is Ancient Copper Dragon, and Ancient Copper Dragon's always been something that I am really not a fan of. This is something that I don't like. I understand that it is a very powerful card when it works, but I don't think it's worth the price, and I don't think it's worth the mana cost. With Haste Enablers, which your deck does have, I get that it gets much better, and maybe you'll get, like, if you roll above, 6, it's better than Old Gnawbone, but 99% of the time, I would just rather own Old Gnawbone, even though it's more mana, because you are guaranteed to be getting the treasure that turn by attacking your opponents. And generally in the late game, Old Gnawbone makes more treasures. So I do understand Ancient Copper Dragon is a big favorite for a lot of players, so I'm not going to just tell you to take it out, but I'd be amiss to not tell you that this is a card I just don't particularly like. It's very kind of, it's a finisher in the way that, like, you play this, you look at your opponents, and if they don't have any removal or interaction, yeah, you're going to win the game. But then I would argue that the fact that they don't have removal or interaction of any kind, or blockers, you know, that's what won you the game, not the Ancient Copper Dragon. It could have been any other big beater, you know, that swings the game in your favor, and it would do the same. Whereas those big beaters like Old Gnawbone at least have an immediate effect on that first combat right after, as opposed to having to need haste or waiting to your next turn. Likewise, I think Decadent Dragon also kind of sticks out as a card. Like, I own this card, and I've wanted to try it, but I don't know to what degree I really like it. Expensive Taste is really, really mid at best. Like, I would much rather, like, you would rather do this to your own deck, right? You don't want to take cards from your opponent's deck most of the time. Don't get me wrong, maybe that's a way you could get tutors into your deck, is by is by taking them off of your opponent's top deck, but otherwise, I think a lot of the times Expensive Taste is more like a mana sink, something to do when you have 3 mana and nothing else to do. And the dragon itself is okay, it's just okay. It's just okay. 4/4 flying trample that doesn't grow, and on attack create a treasure token. I get the fun of this card, but at this power level, I think it's just not very, very strong. I think it's unfortunately kind of lagging behind as a card that you're just kind of okay with. The rest of the deck I'm generally okay with. I just want to do one more check before I look for, or I show our additions. Bootlegger's Stash. Once again, this is, I want to point it out. I don't want to remove it. I understand the power of this card, but in my experience of playing this card, it's outside of when it is, this is win more. Outside of when your commander is out, or outside when you have our favorite pinger, where are you, Mayhem Devil, it's just okay, right? You're spending mana into treasures, which you're either spending right away or you're trying to stockpile, but in order to do that, you've had to pay 6 mana, and this is an artifact, so your opponents are going to try to destroy it incredibly quickly if they're worried about it, which, considering the next thing you're going to do is play Korvold, they're going to be worried about it. So either this is very win more because it's good with Korvold, or else it's just kind of a liability. Once again, I am kind of envisioning that your opponents are playing similar, similarly powered decks as you. And Bootlegger's Stash, outside of having your commander out, outside having a surplus of mana, is a liability to be spending that much of your resources on something that just doesn't do anything in the moment, right? Your opponents are going to, like, Swords to Plowshares, Korvold on the stack. They're going to counter this. They're going to do something. And then with your shields mostly down, because you just spent 6 mana, they're going to try to take you out of the game, most likely. That's at least how I would see it. And for me, that is a cut. Once again, I'm not going to just force you to cut it, because I do understand how fun and powerful this card is, but it's not the vision, it's not the finisher I would envision. And one more thing. One more, and then we go to additions, and it's Binding of the Old Gods. Now, this is a card I really, really do like, and there is some crazy synergy here with Mayhem Devil, but that's not where we're at, I don't think. I think this is just overcosted on both sides. We're at the point, we're playing at this power level, I need removal to be cheaper, and I need ramp to be immediate, right? I would rather play in a deck at this power level. I would rather play either the 2 mana like Nature's Lore ramp, 2 mana ramp, or I would rather just play, I don't know, like Fatal Push or Dismember. Honestly, I would play Dismember in this slot because it's just more reliable, right? Or because it's non-land. If you want to get that, I would play Abrupt Decay probably. And I think I would just be happier. The 4 mana is just a lot, even with the ramp. I get the ability to kind of go, because you don't have 2 mana ramp, you can't even go turn 2 ramp, turn 3 this, which makes it better. But if you have like Ignoble Hierarch, turn 1, turn 3, so then turn 3 you cast this, and then you're still ramping, it's not as bad. But anyways, it's just a card that I think at this power level, we're feeling a bit, it's feeling a little weaker. Likewise, I said it was the last thing, but I forgot to mention this. We have both Fires of Yavimaya and Rhythm of the Wild, whereas over here I see there's Concordant Crossroads, and then Mass Hysteria isn't here. I would play the other two probably. If we're at the point that we're looking for haste enablers, play the 1 mana ones. Once again, this is a deck that just has so much power, and if your opponents are keeping their creatures tapped, then you can get in with things like Korvold a lot easier. You can get in with Old Gnawbone immediately. It's going to be much better, and it is, frankly, they're very strong cards. You can also, something I don't often bring up in the whole Concordant Crossroads. I don't know why I mix those two up all the time, but Concordant Crossroads and Mass Hysteria thing is at power levels such as this, the sandbagging of this card gets really good. In other decks and very aggressive decks, you can kind of play this early and just start pressuring your opponents. But in a deck like this, what you can do is just hold onto it until Korvold's out, or you're about to play Korvold. So you play the Concordant Crossroads, you play Korvold, you sack, draw a card, you attack, you sack, draw a card, and you get those benefits immediately. And I think that's really, really good. So your opponents don't get to get as much use over several turns, and you are already very far ahead. Okay, let's go into additions. So Royal Beast was asking about card draw. So I want to start with a bunch of card draw here that I think is worth playing. We are at the power level that Dark Confidant is very, very good. And I've said this before, but Dark Confidant is now like $5-6. Absolutely pick this up. This is a card that if it stays on the battlefield for 1 or 2 turns, you're going to get a lot of advantage, not including the fact that you can just attack with it, or you could also sacrifice this creature to get a Korvold trigger with certain abilities. So Dark Confidant's real good. Night's Whisper is also very good. I think sometimes we kind of undervalue these low mana draw, like 2 card effects, because I feel we're just really used to very, very powerful draw. But in a deck like this, where not only do we have, you know, very, very like on-theme draw, sometimes you just want those 2 cards immediately. You've generated a bunch of treasures, you don't have enough for Korvold, or Korvold is otherwise like unable to be played, and you need to dig for like an answer or removal or like something. Night's Whisper's ability to just turn 2/2 is just really, really good, and I do really like that. Now, we have a lot of 3 mana cards, so I don't want to put many, but one I think is worth playing is Necropotence. Necropotence is just a phenomenal card. I think a lot of people haven't been playing with it due to the fact that it was out of reprint for so long. It's been recently reprinted, and it's just so powerful. I recognize that this is a card that gets less powerful as the game continues, because you don't need that immense amount of card draw once Korvold's out. But that's also what I like about it, is that this kind of sets you up when Korvold is not an option, or you're worried about Korvold getting removed, that you play Necropotence, you draw a large amount of cards, and then later you don't need to keep putting life into it because Korvold's out there and you can just use Korvold as intended. Just really, really powerful, and I think you're going to be pretty happy with it. The 3 black is kind of hard in 3 colors, I should say, but your mana is very good and you have treasure tokens, so I don't see it that much of as a problem. Then on the other end, and this is really kind of an alternative choice, and I do like it at 4 mana because it's not 3 mana, is Greed. Greed is simply turning black mana into card draw, and with treasures and with ramp, you can get a lot of that really quickly. This is also a card that I think players underestimate, and for a while I did too, because there's just this idea of looking at this and going, okay, so I'm paying 5 mana for the first card, 6 mana for the second card, 7 total mana for the third card. That's a lot of mana. I don't want to do this. But the thing is in decks like this that can generate a bunch of mana out of nowhere, this represents that if you play this, leave it on the battlefield for a while, and then on your last opponent's end step, you kind of put 5 treasures into it and 10 life and draw 5 cards, you will be very, very far ahead and pretty prepared in order to, you know, get your opponents out on the next turn or make a big play. I would probably note that this does play better with something like Shadow Spear, because that life loss does go up really, really quickly. But like Necropotence, you can stop putting life into it once you feel that you've gotten past a certain point. This isn't card draw, but this is something that really caught my eye, especially because I'm feeling that you're kind of low on 2 mana creatures. But Sarenth Steelseeker is a very interesting card in this deck. You're playing a lot of treasure abilities, and Sarenth Steelseeker just kind of turns them into pseudo surveils. It's not exactly surveil because lands go into your hand, but it's pretty darn close. I will note that for people who are maybe a little less experienced, if you can bin the card, because generally every time you bin the card, as opposed to putting it into your hand, you get to see more and more of your deck. You turn on Reanimation, you turn on other synergies, and it gets you a little further. It gets you another chance to get a land from the top of your deck into your hand, which is just card draw. So this card is just really, really impressive. And if you can generate 2 to 3 treasures every now and then, it's going to really hold its weight in the deck, or pull its weight, I should say. I have two cards here that I'm just going to flip between a Deathrite Shaman and Birds of Paradise, and they are the ones that I really do think I would like one or two more copies of these 1 mana ramp cards. And it could just be the Deathrite Shaman and the Birds of Paradise, but maybe a third. I'm not sure what I would, maybe like Delighted Halfling is an option, but it depends on your budget. What I do like about these cards is they immediately propel us into our 3 mana zone, and I do like that. I know you were looking for more land ramp, or that was the theme of the deck. I still want to say these, because I think the little speed bump that you have between 1 and 3 mana is, to an extent, kind of really holding the deck back. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be a lot of situations where you just curve out and you don't worry so much about it, but these let you curve into 3, and then you get to play something early, like, I don't know, like even things like, let's go back to the deck, getting a really early Braids, getting an early Azusa, getting an early Dryad of the Elysian Grove. These are really, really strong things that you can kind of propel yourself into. Kellogg as well to immediately create a treasure. Necropotence, though it's not in here. Black Market Connections. These are the cards that I really want you to immediately be able to play. And once they're out, you're going to start getting so much advantage. Not even including things like the Tireless Twins that can start getting value the next turn, or untapping with that, playing one of the Tireless cards, and immediately playing a land is very, very good. So having those at least two more 1 mana ramps, I think will make a significant difference, especially since Deathrite Shaman is incredibly cheap right now, and you are playing at a power level that allows it. And also Birds of Paradise has also gone down in price. Ravnica Remaster, I think, has more bangers than I really considered. I never really looked at this card once I found out how expensive the packs were, but maybe I need to look at to buy singles from it. Maybe I'll make one of those videos on that. But in the meantime, let's keep going. So I have here Unearth, another pair of cards, Unearth and Life and Death. I'm not going to do the whole spiel on Life and Death. Life and Death is just, it's Reanimate at 2 mana, and Unearth is just Unearth. The reason I wanted to talk about these is that, once again, we have so many relevant creatures that are 3 mana or below, and I really want the means to bring them back. Whether it just be a Ragavan, whether it be just another trigger off Sakura Tribe Elder, whether it be getting, Braids back, which is very powerful in the deck, or Dryad or Kellogg, or Mayhem Devil. And I wanted to put these here because we're transitioning into talking about alternative win conditions, and Mayhem Devil really does feel like one of your main win conditions. Once again, Royal Beast said they don't like pingers. Mayhem Devil's a pinger. I'm not going to question it too much, and I'm going to say that please keep this card in here. It does represent not only just pinging opponents, but pinging down their creatures and setting you up into boards that allows you to immediately win. So not only do I like this card, I really like the idea of reanimating this card, so having both Unearth and Life and Death are really good here to bring them back. And Life and Death is obviously better too as well, because we can use it to get back Mazarek, we can get back Old Gnawbone, we can let our commander go into the graveyard and bring them back. Very, very good cards. But what are our other finishers? Well, so this one's kind of cheating, because this is a pinger, but I would be very amiss to not say this for other people who may not be playing the deck. And also, I think this is probably a card that maybe should not be examined as a pinger. This is just a one-stop, win condition. This is Marionette Master. You fabricate 3+1/+1 counters onto her, and then what it says is whenever an artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses 4 life is the goal here. And just to be straightforward, you play this and you win the game. Like, that's part of something that I wanted to put this on the list, even though I know there's no pingers. This is not a pinger. This is, you count your treasures, and then you see if you can play Marionette Master, and then you win the game. You don't play this for value. You don't play this for like incremental damage. This is a one-stop shop. So I think this is probably a very, very strong one and the easiest one. But the other one for me is Torment of Hailfire. It's a little pricier, but it is the win condition that this deck can use the most. This will, with enough treasures, this will almost guarantee a win or set up your opponents into a situation where they just cannot beat you due to like the sheer advantage of them losing their entire boards, their hands, and being on low life. This, of course, works really, really well in tandem with something like Mayhem Devil, where you can use, you know, all the treasure into Torment of Hailfire and use Mayhem Devil to ping down a bunch of tokens or low life creatures to increase the probability of Torment of Hailfire dealing 3 damage, or forcing your opponents to lose more and more of their board for that. This is probably just the best card to finish the deck with, as a finisher, and there's just a lot of situations that I think this is going to be your answer. Even what I think is interesting is you can still play this at like a mid-level, putting like 7 or 8 mana into this, almost like a value play, as kind of a soft mass discard board clear card. If you can guarantee that if they just took the damage, they would die, you can put them into like bad situations. So like, for example, if you can only pump 7 mana into this and your opponents are, you know, are close to like 30-25 health, if they do just say, okay, I'll take the damage, it makes your next few attacks very, very powerful. It also enables things, once again, on the opposite side of then playing Mayhem Devil and then taking some players out of the game. Because if they just haphazardly pay all their life and you represent burn, you can win the game. Also, I believe you have Chandra's Ignition, which also works with this really well on either side. Either you ignite first or you torment first. Either way, most likely your opponents are out of the game. I would probably torment first. I'd torment first so your opponent, because I rely on my opponents being greedier than smart most of the time. So they'll most likely try to keep as many permanents as they can, and then Chandra's Ignition will either take out their life total or take out all the permanents they refuse to sacrifice. Then this last one kind of came to mind because it is, you said it was like a Korvold Fakehurst Voltron deck, or that you were, let me open this back up again, Voltron-ish Korvold. So with that in mind, I am assuming that combat damage and combat is still very important to you, and so this is a card that I think is very, very good at ensuring or enabling that as an option. Now obviously Old Gnawbone is the card that combos off. Likewise, the Ancient Copper Dragon also allows you to, ooh, I missed one. We'll just go back here anyways and pretend you didn't see Ewit. Ancient Copper Dragon as well can generate, even though I told you to take it out, a bunch of treasures. Another card that I told you to take out, Decadent Dragon, can make more treasures. Grim Hireling, where's the other one? Professional Facebreaker. If you have the right combination where treasures can pay for all, if not the majority of Aggravated Assault's activated ability cost, you can get, like, because the thing is, if it's infinite, you're just gonna get infinite attacks and defeat your opponents. But if you can generate 3 treasures on attack, then basically you're using 2 mana each time to get another attack in, which is another Korvold trigger. It's another trigger with other creatures. It's another a chance to do a lot of damage, right? It is also another untap. Something that's worth considering, I should have mentioned this, if you have like the mana dorks, like the ones I suggested, and those mana dorks can help pay for this, they get untapped when you pay this as well. So they don't even need to attack. You don't even, if you can generate 3 treasures and you have 2 mana dorks, you are also infinite. So there's a lot of benefit to this card, and I think it's very, very doable. It is 3 mana, which is kind of falling into that kind of problem, but not the last 3 mana card I am going to suggest, which is Ewit. Let's finish on Ewit. Ewit is a great card. You'll never be sad with Ewit, and especially at this power level, especially in a deck that is looking for finishers, this card is just going to be very, very good. And in fact, I think it's definitely better than some of our more, you know, combo-y cards, such as, let's see, like Chatterfang even, or Springbloom Druid, or one of the Tireless Twins. This is better than that, and those cards are really, really good, you know, when our combos are working or when we're ahead. But Ewit is just always good. Not only is it going to get your removal back, not only is it going to get you another copy of Chandra's Ignition or Toxic Deluge, it's also just going to get you another copy of Torment of Hailfire, or your commander once it's died so many times, or Greater Gargadon for another chance to use the suspend triggers as sack outlets. Like, this card is just so good in a deck like this that I think you'd be very amiss to not play it. And I think that's generally the things I want to say. This deck is really, really good. I really like it, and I think it's already in a really strong place. I'm going to say maybe one day, not today, but like you know, when you're out and about and you're struck by inspiration, maybe consider tutors. I think at this point we're rapidly at that kind of ceiling that we're getting to, that without some like a few tutors, this deck is kind of not have many other options to go. And it's fine if you just want to finish the deck at that power level, but like even just putting, you know, Diabolic Intent, which is both a sack outlet for one creature and a tutor, you're going to just make a little bit of your deck more consistent, more fun to play, because you'll get the combos going more, I was going to say consistent again, but more reliably, and you're going to be able to react with your opponent's board states and their own game plans a lot better, because you can then tutor into removal or tutor into a plan that can, you know, sidestep their plan. You know, if they just hate Korvold out of the game and you can't really use Korvold anymore, you need to have, you know, tutors can really help you pick out the next card so you stay in the game. But that's my spiel on it. I do understand that people don't really love it, and, you know, everyone gets to play Commander the way they like. Thank you so much, Royal Beast. Thank you for sending this deck, and I do really appreciate it and your support for the channel. I'd love to hear what you think and where you're going to go with the deck from this point on. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.